Class exercise on the street. So the class exercise on the street is basically a starting point to experimenting with the features that your camera may offer. So whether you work in small groups or you do this independently, you want to experiment with your camera controls. If you're on campus, certainly walk around campus, snap pictures. If you're not on campus, you can walk around your home, you can walk around in a public building, whatever's convenient for you. At the end, you'll want to compile this and do a presentation and demonstrate what you learned with this exercise. You will have to include specific camera settings that were utilized with the photos, and you want to make sure that each of the slides are labeled with that required information. So your first experiment will be with ISO sensitivity. You want to take one photo that has a dark ISO. If your camera can get to 3200, that would be wonderful. Most cameras are not able to go that far, so you will want to see what your camera can do. And then you're going to do a lighter ISO where it's less sensitive, something that's a lower number. Now, if you're using a mobile device, specifically if you have an iPhone, there are apps out there that will help you control your camera and allow you to change the ISO settings. Here's an example of a group of students who experimented with the ISO sensitivity. Here's an example where a student experimented again with the ISO sensitivity, and you can see that the labels are below. This is exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for the settings that you used while you took that photo. If your camera does not store that metadata with your photo, you will have to document as you take the picture. Now, if some of you have access to Adobe Bridge, Adobe Bridge will allow you to look at that metadata. The next two images that you'll compare will be working with shutter speed. So you'll take one photo with a fast shutter speed and one with a slow shutter speed. Again, your camera might not say shutter speed. And so what you will want to do is see if it posts it as something else. Does it say action? Does it say portrait or landscape? You can kind of figure out what is controlling that shutter speed. The third experiment will be with white balance, and this is called bracketing. Remember, when we're trying to figure out how we can control the color temperature or the light temperature. So you may have settings in your camera that indicate indoor, outdoor, fluorescent, daylight, incandescent. Depends on what your camera has. So again, you want to experiment with this. And it may just be an exposure setting that you can control. Here's an example of white balance. So again, the student looked at their camera and noticed that there was a fluorescent setting, a daylight setting, and a tungsten. So it is best to do this assignment looking at the same subject or content. Stand in the same position, the same spot, and take the photo so you can directly compare what's happening when you change it from one setting to the next. Here's another student's example, again, of white balance. Notice that their settings posted as daylight, incandescent, and fluorescent. Now this example, we see a color temperature difference. However, the student did not document. So I have to guess. If I have to guess, I'm not going to give you credit for it. But you can notice that the settings did change. And here as well, same picture. Basically the color temperature changed, but it has to be documented. You have to tell me, is it white balance that you're experimenting with here, and what are your settings on your camera? And then lastly, we're going to deal with depth of field. Again, there's a combination here and where we get our depth of field. It's aperture, it's focal length, it's image size. I have a link here if you'd want more information. So you want to have a depth of field that's near and then one that's large or far. So near meaning that something close to me is in focus, the rest is out of focus. Far meaning everything appears to be in focus. Here's an example of a camera that didn't have f-stops. The depth of field was hard to control, but they found that if they changed their setting from standard to portrait, notice how the detail in the focus changed. So in standard mode, we have a very large depth of field. Those lockers are in focus way to the back. In portrait mode, notice that they blur very quickly. So we're losing that focus. In fact, the point of focus is actually very narrow. It's small. So this is an experimentation. Note, if you choose to do this project as a group, you must all turn in individual assignments. So you may work together, but each one of you are taking your own photos.